Have you ever felt a betrayal so raw it tears your heart open, leaving you gasping for breath? Imagine the children you carried, whose tears you wiped, whose dreams you nurtured turning on you, seeing you as a burden, an old chair to be shoved into a corner, forgotten or sold for scraps. Picture their hands, the ones you held through their first shaky steps, signing papers that rip away your home, your memories, your very soul. That's my story, a tale of love twisted into treachery, of a mother's heart shattered by her own, flesh and blood. But it's also a story of fire in weathered bones, wisdom forged in pain, and a justice that burned slow but fierce, like embers refusing to die. I'm Eleanor Thompson, 88 years old, sitting here on my balcony in 2023, surrounded by pots of basil, lavender, and a small cherry tree I grew from a pit saved from my old life. This balcony, this tiny patch of earth, is my sanctuary now, a testament to the life I clawed back from those who tried to take it. Why do I linger here, touching these leaves as I tell my tale? Because this is where I found myself again, where I rebuilt a home not of walls, but of my own unyielding spirit. Old age creeps in like a shadow, silent and cruel. It starts small, keys left in the fridge, your grandchildren's names slipping like sand through your fingers, a stumble on a cracked sidewalk that betrays your once steady legs. Then come the looks, those cold, wordless glances from your children, dripping with impatience when you repeat a story for the third time, unaware you've told it before. Secretive stares they exchange over your head, as if you're already a ghost in your own home. That's how it began with my children, James, Margaret, and Samuel. For 63 years I was a mother, for 49 a wife, and for 25 a prisoner in a place they called Sunset Haven Retirement Home. A place with no warmth of autumn, only the bitter chill of winter, and an endless wait for the end. It was June 8, 1998, my 63rd birthday, when they brought me to that home. I can still taste the cherry cheesecake they carried in, my favorite. Its sweetness a cruel mask for their hollow smiles that never reached their eyes. I see the pen they pressed into my trembling fingers, the papers I signed without reading. Who wouldn't trust their own children? The next day they sold my house, the one my husband Frank and I built with our bare hands, brick by brick, sweat and dreams. The house where my children were born, where every nick in the wall, every creak in the floorboards whispered our family's story. They thought they'd woven the perfect scheme, old mom tucked away, their inheritance divided, their lives free, to roll on without me. But they didn't know I had a plan, one I'd been crafting for 2 years, ever since I caught those first chilling glances, a plan that ripened in me like cherries in my old backyard orchard, patient, waiting for the moment to strike. I was born in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, in 1935, when the world was still blind to the storms brewing on its horizon. My parents were humble folks, my father a carpenter, his hands rough as the wood he shaped, my mother a homemaker, stitching clothes for neighbors to keep us fed. I was 5 when World War II erupted, shattering my world like a glass ornament, dropped on stone. In 1943, at the war's height, they left me with my Aunt Clara, promising to find a better life in Philadelphia. They never came back. Did they perish in the war's chaos? Did they build that better life elsewhere? I never knew. All they left was a yellowed letter, its edges curling like a dying leaf, one I couldn't bear to open for decades. That abandonment, was my first taste of betrayal, a wound that never fully healed, but it taught me early to stand on my own. Aunt Clara became my anchor, the mother I'd lost. She taught me to knead dough for pies, brew teas from wild herbs, and mend a broken spirit. Her small cherry orchard was my sanctuary, where I'd wander among the trees, their branches heavy with fruit, their roots deep in the earth. "You've got a gift for growing things, Eleanor," she'd say, watching me nurse a frail sapling back to life. She never knew I watered those trees with my tears, hidden from the world, tears for parents who left without a goodbye, for a childhood stolen by war. That orchard shaped me, gave me strengths I didn't know I'd need later, a strength that would carry me through darker days. At 18, I met Frank behind the counter of our town's grocery store. He was the butcher's son, tall with dark hair, and eyes that danced with quiet mischief, even when his face stayed solemn. We married in 1955, in the lean years after the war, when weddings were hushed, modest affairs. We bought our house on Maple Lane that same year, a small 3-bedroom with a garden where I planted a cherry tree to honor Aunt Clara's orchard. There our children came into the world. James in 1956, Margaret in 1958, and our unexpected joy, Samuel, in 1962. That house was more than walls. It was our heart, our history, every room filled with laughter, arguments, and love. Frank drove trucks for a state delivery company, hauling goods across Pennsylvania's winding roads. I stayed home, raising the kids and taking in sewing, just like my mother. The 1960s were tough. Prices climbed, tensions simmered, but we made it work. The kids never went hungry, always had clean clothes, books for school. We lived simply, rooted in routine. Sunday dinners with pot roast and mashed potatoes, summer trips to Lake Erie where the kids splashed in the waves, Christmases with homemade gingerbread and carols by the fire. Frank wasn't one for flowery words, but he was my rock. Never raised his voice, never came home drunk, never wasted a penny. His love was quiet, steady, like the hum of his truck's engine on a long haul. That's how our life flowed, day by day, year by year, until 1989, when the world broke again. Frank died that year, his heart giving out during a Sunday dinner. One moment, he was sparring with James over politics, his voice warm with conviction. The next, his head slumped to the table, his eyes, those eyes that always held a spark, gone dark forever. I was 54, alone in a house that felt too vast, too silent. The kids had their own lives by then. James, a truck driver like his father, crisscrossing the country. Margaret, a sharp accountant at a local bank. Samuel, our restless youngest, drifting from job to job, searching for a place to belong. I thought I'd raised them right, taught them love, loyalty, family. But grief has a way of revealing truths you don't want to see. After Frank's death, things shifted, slow and sly, like a snake coiling in the grass. Their calls dwindled, their visits grew brief, perfunctory. Then came the questions, rapt, in concern, but sharp with intent. "Mom, have you thought about selling the house? It's too big for you now." "Mom, we know a doctor who says you need round-the-clock care at your age." "Mom, you can't cling to the past. Plan for the future." I didn't see it then, but now sitting here on this balcony, the truth is clear as the autumn sky. They were laying the groundwork for their betrayal, a plan that came to a head on my 63rd birthday. In 1997, James asked for a big loan to grow his trucking business. I gave it to him. He was my son. How could I say no? A year later, Margaret sold Aunt Clara's heirloom jewelry without a word, pieces I'd kept as memories of my childhood. "Mom, you never wear them and we needed the money for the kids' vacation," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. Samuel didn't ask. He just took cash from my dresser, my purse, even the old coffee tin where I stashed my savings. I stayed silent. How does a mother accuse her own child of stealing? But by June 1998, something in me shattered. A cold, unyielding truth settled in, heavy as a glacier. My children saw me as an obstacle, my house and savings as a prize to claim, before time ran out. It was June 7, 1998, the day before my 63rd birthday. The roses in my garden were ablaze, red as blood, their scent so strong it slipped through closed windows. I was on the porch, peeling potatoes for dinner, when 3 cars pulled up one after another. James's first, a gleaming black SUV, a trophy of his thriving business. Then Margaret's, a practical new sedan, polished to a shine. Finally, Samuel's, or rather, his wife Barbara's, since he never bothered with a license. Seeing all 3 together was rare. They usually came separately as if avoiding each other. A knot of dread tightened in my chest, growing heavier when I saw their faces, grim, resolute, with a strange glint I couldn't read, like predators circling prey. "Mom, we need to talk," James said, sitting across from me, his voice steady, commanding. He always spoke first, the leader of the pack. "We're worried about you. You're alone here. The house needs constant repairs. The garden's too much for you to handle." "I managed just fine," I said, my fingers tightening around the potato peeler, the knife suddenly heavy in my hand, like a weapon I didn't yet know I'd need. "But what if something happens?" Margaret chimed in, sitting beside him, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "What if you fall and no one's there? What if you get sick in the middle of the night?" Samuel stayed silent, as always, leaning against the doorframe, hands buried in his pockets, eyes glued to the floor like he was ashamed to be there. "We found the perfect place for you, Mom," James said, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. "Sunset Haven Retirement. Home the best in the county. Round-the-clock medical care, activities, people your age to keep you company." I opened the brochure with trembling hands. The cover showed a pristine white building, wide windows, smiling seniors on a sunlit terrace. It looked idyllic. Too idyllic, like a lie dressed up in pretty pictures. "What about my house?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, already sensing the answer, like a storm on the horizon. "We'll take care of it, Mom," Margaret said quickly, her words rehearsed, too smooth. "We can rent it out to cover your stay, or sell it, and invest the money to make sure you're cared for the rest of your life." "And we'll visit all the time," James added, his tone too cheerful, like a salesman closing a deal. "It's only 20 miles away. We can come every weekend." Samuel finally spoke, his voice low, almost a mumble. "It's for your own good, Mom." Then James pushed a document toward me, pages thick with fine print, his hand casually covering part of it as he handed me a pen. "It's just a formality, Mom. Authorization for us to handle the details of your stay." Holding that pen, I felt a chill crawl through me, like winter had settled in my bones despite the June sun, the scent of roses, my children around me. I felt stranded in a frozen wasteland, betrayed, alone. I signed. God, why did I sign? Even now in 2023, as I sit here stroking the leaves of my cherry tree, I ask myself that question. Was I so naive, so desperate to believe in their love? Or was I just too weary from fighting the truth I'd seen creeping in for 2 years? That my children were becoming strangers, their hearts turning cold as stone. When my pen touched the paper, a sharp pain stabbed through me like something vital snapped. My heart, maybe, or the last thread of hope that I'd misjudged their intentions. My signature was shaky, not like the bold one I'd used for years, on their school report cards, their permission slips, their lives. "Great, Mom," James said, snatching the document before I could read it, his haste betraying him. "You won't regret this." Margaret's enthusiasm surged, unnaturally bright, like a mask slipping. "You'll see, it'll be better than here. No more worrying about a leaky roof, mowing the lawn, or all those daily chores. You'll have time for yourself, for your hobbies." "What hobbies?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. My hobbies were my garden, my cherry tree, my roses, my life, the very things they were taking. Samuel, at least, had the decency to look ashamed, his eyes avoiding mine, as he scuffed his shoe against the floor, like a child caught in a lie. "We'll pick you up tomorrow, Mom," James said, standing, already checking his watch, eager to be gone. "Rest up. We'll handle everything." After they left, I sat on the porch, staring at my garden, tears carving paths down my cheeks. I hadn't cried like that since Frank's death, maybe never. The roses glowed redder than ever, as if mourning with me. That night sleep wouldn't come. I wandered the house, trailing my fingers along the walls, the furniture, the curtains, trying to etch them into my soul. I stopped at Frank's photo on the bedroom dresser, his smile frozen in time. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What would you do in my place?" But Frank, always a man of few words, stayed silent. He'd loved his family with every fiber of his being. Could he have imagined his children doing this to me? At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to myself, spilling my fears, my doubts, my suspicions, a testament to that day, in case anyone ever asked if I'd gone willingly. When I finished, I stepped into the garden with a cup of tea, the steam curling in the cool morning air. The sun rose, painting the roses a deeper red, the cherry tree standing tall, like a sentinel of my past. The world stirred to life, but I felt mine crumbling, slipping through my fingers like the soil I'd tended for decades. They came the next day, my 63rd birthday, just after noon, with a cherry cheesecake and a bottle of my homemade cherry cordial from the previous summer. "Happy birthday, Mom," Margaret said, her hug stiff, her perfume sharp and suffocating like a cloud of deceit. "Pack the essentials. There's not much space for personal items at the home." I'd already packed a small suitcase. Just clothes, a few photos, my Bible with my parents' yellowed letter tucked inside, and the silver locket Frank gave me on our wedding day. My entire life, reduced to a bag no bigger than the one my parents left me with at Aunt Clara's all those years ago. James was restless, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. "We need to hurry, Mom. They're holding your spot until 5:40. "Can I say goodbye to my garden?" I asked, clinging to the last shred of my dignity, knowing it wasn't really a question but a plea. "Of course," James said, his smile forced, brittle. "But not too long, okay? I stepped outside, their eyes heavy on my back, like guards watching a prisoner. I moved slowly along the vegetable beds I'd planted that spring, brushing the tomato leaves just starting to bear fruit, their green scent clinging to my fingers. I stopped under the cherry tree, my hand resting on its rough bark, warm from the sun. "Goodbye, old friend," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Watch over this place when I'm gone." I pressed my forehead to the trunk, letting a single tear fall into the soil, a final offering to the life I was losing. Back inside, they were loading my suitcase into the car. James held the cheesecake box as if it were a prop in their charade. Margaret was on the phone, her back to me, her voice low but urgent. "Yes, tonight. It's all set. No issues." The words landed like stones in my gut, but I said nothing, my heart too heavy to speak. The drive to Sunset Haven took 30 minutes, though James had claimed it was only 20 miles. I sat in the back, squeezed between Margaret and Samuel, feeling like a prisoner under escort, the air thick with their silence. The home didn't match the brochure's lies. The building was white, sure, but the paint was peeling in ugly patches. The windows were small, the grounds overgrown with weeds. No smiling seniors graced the terrace, just one elderly woman in a wheelchair, staring blankly into the distance, her face a mirror of resignation. At the reception desk, a bored young woman barely looked up as James handed over papers, signed something, and slid an envelope across the counter. It all happened so fast, like they couldn't wait to be rid of me, to wash their hands of the mother who'd become a liability. My room was a cell, a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, a small table. The window faced the parking lot, offering a view of cracked asphalt and rusted cars. The walls, painted a sickly hospital green, seemed to close in, suffocating any hope I had left. "Here we are," James said, dropping my suitcase on the floor with a thud. "You'll settle in, Mom. You'll be fine." "When will you visit?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of my fear. "Soon," Margaret said, too quickly, her eyes darting away. "Maybe next weekend. We'll call first." The goodbye was cold, perfunctory. No real hugs, no tears, just empty promises I knew they'd never keep. After they left, I stood at the window, watching them climb into their car. James said something that made Margaret laugh, a sharp, careless sound that cut through me. Samuel was on his phone, gesturing wildly, already distracted. They drove off without a single glance back, leaving me in a place meant to be my tomb, a place where I was supposed to fade away. Those first days at Sunset Haven were a waking nightmare, a fog I couldn't escape. The routine was rigid, soulless, designed to strip away your will. Wake up at 6, breakfast at 7, meds at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 5, lights out at 8. Between meals there were activities, drawing, puzzles, health lectures, led by staff who moved like they were counting the minutes until their shift ended. The loneliness was the worst, a heavy, suffocating thing. Surrounded by other residents, nurses, aides, I felt more alone than I ever had. Most of the seniors were lost in their own minds, their eyes vacant, or so bitter they snapped at anyone who tried to talk. My room, though clean, felt sterile, foreign, like a hospital ward I'd never leave. I slept fitfully, waking often, my heart racing with the fleeting belief I was home, only to be crushed by the reality of those green walls, that parking lot view. My kids didn't call or visit that first weekend, or the next, or the one after. That. By the end of the first month, I knew they never would. Their silence was louder than any words, a confirmation of their betrayal. Physically, it was grueling too. My body, toughened by years of gardening, climbing stairs, cooking, and cleaning, was now confined to a chair or short shuffles down the hallway. My muscles weakened, my joints stiffened, protesting the inactivity. The food was another blow. Bland, tasteless slop served on plastic trays, nothing like the fresh vegetables from my garden, the warm pies I'd baked for Sunday dinners. I missed the smell of soil, the weight of a spade in my hands, the taste of cherries plucked straight from the tree. But the deepest wound was the loss of control. I couldn't choose when to wake, what to eat, or when to step outside. Every request went through staff too busy or indifferent to care, their dismissals like slaps to my dignity. I felt myself fading, like a flower cut from its roots, wilting in a vase. The days blurred into weeks, each one heavier than the last. I'd sit by my window, staring at the parking lot, wondering if this was all that was left, a slow death in a place that smelled of antiseptic and despair. But something in me, some stubborn spark, refused to go out. Maybe it was Aunt Clara's lessons, or Frank's quiet strength, or the memory of my cherry tree standing tall against the odds. Whatever it was, it kept me from giving up, even when I wanted to. 2 months in, Mrs. Dorothy Miller, a retired school teacher with white hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's, knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" she asked, sitting on my bed without waiting for an invitation, her presence filling the room like a burst of sunlight. "I've been watching you, Eleanor. You're different. You haven't given up yet." "I'm trying," I said, wary, unsure what she wanted from me. My voice was hoarse from disuse, my spirit battered but not broken. "Most folks here were discarded like old furniture," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but laced with fire. "Left to rot by families who don't care. But some of us fight back. You've got that fight in you, I can see it." "How do you fight in a place like this?" I asked, bitterness creeping into my words, the weight of my loss pressing down. "With small victories," she said, a sly smile spreading across her face, like she was sharing a secret. "You start small, Eleanor, and you build from there." Her words lit a spark in me, a flicker of hope in the dark. That same day, I asked a nurse for the phone to call my kids and check on my house. She refused, her voice clipped, saying it was for staff only, and I could use the payphone in the hall, if I had money, which I didn't. That was the moment something snapped, not from despair, but from a white-hot anger that surged through me like wildfire burning away the fog. "Get me the director now," I said, my voice steady, summoning the woman I used to be, the one who'd raised 3 children, kept a house running, and tended a garden through storms and droughts. "Or I'll march to his office myself and tell him how you treat us here." The nurse froze, stunned by my tone, then handed me the phone without a word. That was my first small victory, a crack in the walls of this prison, and I felt a rush of power I hadn't known I still had. I wasn't stopping there. My meeting with Director Harold Brooks was the opening shot in my war. He sat behind his desk, a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and a gaze dulled by years of others' misery. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your frustration," he said, barely glancing at my file, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But we have procedures. Your children pay for your stay, and they're our clients. If you have issues, take it up with them." "I have no contact with my children," I said, anger rising like a tide. "They don't visit, don't call. I don't even know what's happened to my house." "That's not your concern anymore," he said, his tone cold, patronizing, like I was a child who'd wandered too far. "You signed over control of your assets. Focus on your health and comfort here." His words were a slap, but I didn't flinch. I left his office bruised but not broken, my mind racing. I needed allies, information, a strategy to take back what was mine. Dorothy became my first ally. Her room, our war room. A safe space where we could speak without fear of eavesdropping staff. "You need eyes and ears outside these walls," she said one evening, her voice low, conspiratorial. "Someone to be, your bridge to the world." I thought of Betty, the pharmacist on Maple Lane. We'd been close for years, sharing tea and gossip when I picked up Frank's prescriptions. She was kind, trustworthy, the kind of friend who'd listen and act. When Dorothy's daughter, Ellen, visited, I slipped her a letter for Betty, pouring out my story, my children's betrayal, my imprisonment, my desperation for help. I begged her to find out what had happened to my house, my life. 2 weeks later, Betty came, her eyes brimming with tears as she hugged me tight, her warmth a lifeline in that cold place. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry," she said, gripping my hand so hard it hurt. "The whole neighborhood's in shock. Your kids sold your house a week after they brought you here. They threw a big party, got drunk, then signed the papers with a realtor. A developer from Pittsburgh bought it to tear it down for condos." My legs gave way, and I sank onto the bed, Darcy steadying me. My house, the one Frank and I built, where we raised our kids, where every corner held a memory, was gone, erased like it had never existed. "My garden, my cherry tree," I whispered, my voice breaking, barely audible. "Cleared," Betty said softly, her voice thick with sorrow. "They bulldozed it all for construction." That was a blow deeper than any I'd felt, like losing a piece of my soul, a wound that bled memories. For days, I lay in bed, refusing food, conversation, or movement, my world reduced to those green walls and the parking lot beyond. Nurses cast pitying glances. One even filled out a form for a psychiatric consult, as if my grief was madness. But on the 5th day, Dorothy stormed in, flung open my window, and let the crisp October air flood, the room sharp and alive. "Enough, Eleanor," she said, her voice cutting through my haze. "You can't give up now. You're stronger than this." "What's left?" I asked, staring at the ceiling, my voice hollow. "My home, my garden, my kids, gone. I'm trapped here until I die." "You have life," she snapped, sitting on my bed, her eyes blazing. "And you have justice waiting to be served. Your kids can't just walk away after this." The word justice was a match struck in the dark, igniting something fierce in me. They couldn't destroy my life and escape unscathed. "What do I do?" I asked, propping myself up, feeling a flicker of the old Eleanor stirring. "First you rebuild your strength," Dorothy said, her voice steady, commanding. "Then you find out exactly what you signed. And finally, you get a lawyer to take back what's yours." That moment marked a turning point. I stopped sinking into despair and started building a plan. like planting a seed in barren soil and willing it to grow. First, I focused on my health. I ate every meal, even the tasteless slop, and asked for extra portions when I could. I began exercising, stretching in my room, pacing the hallways, then walking the home's neglected garden where weeds choked the flower beds, but the air felt alive. My body, toughened by years of digging in the earth and hauling laundry, responded, my muscles waking, my joints loosening. I felt my strength returning, not just in my body, but in my spirit, a fire rekindled. With Betty's help, now a regular visitor, I started gathering information. The document I signed wasn't just consent for the home. It was a power of attorney, handing my entire estate to my children. Every dime, every memory, every piece of my life signed away in a moment of trust. But it's contestable, Betty said, her voice firm with conviction. If they misled you about what you were signing, we can fight it. That hope was a lifeline, a rope thrown to a drowning woman, but I needed more, a lawyer, which meant money I didn't have. What about your pension? Dorothy asked one evening as we sat in her room, plotting like conspirators in a war. Where's that money going? Straight to the home, I said, bitterness creeping in. James set it up that way. You're entitled to a portion for personal expenses, she said, her eyes narrowing. It's your legal right. We need to know how much you're getting and how much you should be keeping. That's when I uncovered another layer of their betrayal. My pension, though modest, was more than the cost of my stay at Sunset Haven. I should have been receiving a monthly allowance for personal use. Money I'd never seen, not a single cent. That discovery was like pouring fuel on my fire. I wasn't just fighting for justice now. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, the life they'd tried to steal. Over the next few months, my plan took shape, rooted in the evidence Dorothy, Betty, and I pieced together. My children hadn't just betrayed me. They'd broken the law, exploiting my trust to seize what wasn't theirs. But I needed money to hire a lawyer, and that meant reclaiming my pension. I marched into Director Brooks's office again, armed. With documents on my pension and state regulations I'd gotten Betty to dig up from the library. I'd spent hours poring over them in my room, my eyes straining in the dim light, but every word fueled my resolve. Mrs. Thompson, this is a misunderstanding, Brooks said, flipping through the papers, his voice tight, his face betraying a flicker of unease. Your children told us your pension covers your stay in full. That's illegal, I said, my voice calm but unyielding, like the steady drip of water wearing down stone. And we both know it. I'm sure you wouldn't want this reported to the State Oversight Board or the local newspapers. Sunset, Haven's reputation and your license could take a hit. It was a bluff. I had no contacts in the media or with regulators, but Brooks didn't know that. His eyes widened slightly, and after a long, tense silence, he relented. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. Starting next month, you'll get your rightful pension share, plus back payments for the last 3 months. That victory felt like storming a fortress, my heart pounding with triumph as I walked out of his office. It was a small step, but it was mine, and it gave me the means to fight on. With that money, I hired Mr. Walter Hayes, a gray-haired attorney with a kind face and a reputation for defending the elderly. He came to Sunset Haven in May 1999, 10 months after I'd been locked away. He sat across from me in the home's sterile visiting room, listening as I poured out my story. his pen scratching notes in a small pad. When I finished, he closed it and looked me in the eye, his gaze steady, respectful. "Mrs. Thompson, what your children did is not only morally reprehensible but legally questionable," he said. "The document you signed was likely obtained under false pretenses. If they misled you about its contents, we have grounds to void it." "What does that mean?" I asked, my heart racing, hope and fear tangling in my chest. "It means we can fight to reclaim your assets, or at least part of them," he said. "But I must warn you, this will be a long, tough battle. Your children won't give up easily, and it'll mean facing them in court." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I have time, and I have fire in my bones." When he left, I felt a surge of emotions, hope, fear, determination, but above all, a sense that I was finally taking back control. This balcony, where I sit now, surrounded by my little garden, is a reminder of that moment. It's not just a place to grow herbs and flowers. It's a symbol of the life I fought for, the independence I reclaimed, the strength I found when everything else was taken. The legal battle against my own children was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every letter from Hayes, every court notice was like reliving their betrayal, each one a knife twisting in the wound. But it gave me purpose, a fire that burned brighter with every step. Hayes was more than a lawyer. He was a guide, patient and thorough, explaining every legal term, every strategy, every possible outcome. "Your children hired a top-tier lawyer," he told me during one visit, his voice calm but serious. "Very expensive, very sharp. With my money," I said bitterly, the words tasting like ash. "From my house." "They're claiming you were unfit to make decisions," he continued. "They say they acted in your best interest, that you knew exactly what you were signing." "That's a lie," I said, fury rising like a storm. "They know they tricked me. They know what they did." "And that's what we need to prove," Hayes said, his eyes steady. "We need more evidence, more witnesses, and we need to prepare you for a face-to-face with your kids in court. Confrontation." The word landed like a gavel, heavy and final. Could I stand in a courtroom, look my children in the eye, and accuse them of fraud, of shattering my life? Could I air our family's pain in front of strangers? But then I pictured my house, my garden, my cherry tree, gone, replaced by a developer's greed. I remembered their absence, their laughter as they drove away, their ease in erasing me. I had no choice. This was about more than money or property. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my right to exist. For weeks, I prepared for the trial. Hayes ran mock cross-examinations, asking tough questions to ready me for their lawyers' attacks. Betty and her husband, Tom, agreed to testify, having witnessed the party my kids threw after selling my house, a drunken celebration of their victory. Each day, the tension grew, a knot in my chest that tightened with every passing hour. At night, nightmares plagued me, standing naked and defenseless, in court while my children laughed from the gallery, their faces twisted with mockery. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, but those fears didn't break me. They fueled me, forging my pain into resolve, my tears into strength. A week before the trial, Hayes brought a bombshell that changed everything. "We found a copy of your husband's will in the court archives," he said, handing me a yellowed folder, its edges brittle with age. I opened it with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the page until I reached the marked passage. The house and property at Maple Lane are bequeathed to my beloved wife, Eleanor, with the condition that it cannot be sold without her notarized consent. Upon her death, it is to be donated to the children's charity we supported for years. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the ink. Frank, my quiet, stoic Frank, had protected me even after his death. He'd foreseen our children's greed, or at least suspected it, and left me a shield I didn't know I had. "This changes everything," Hayes said, a rare smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "The sale was illegal without your notarized consent. We can void the power of attorney and challenge the transaction itself." That news was like a gust of wind clearing the fog, filling me with a fierce, burning hope. I felt stronger, surer, ready to face my children in court, not just for me, but for Frank, whose final wishes they'd trampled without a second thought. I clutched that will like a talisman, its pages a reminder that I wasn't alone, that Frank's love still stood with me, even from beyond. The trial came faster than I expected, a storm breaking after months of gathering clouds. Hayes picked me up early, helping me prepare, his calm presence steadying my nerves. I wore my best navy dress with a white collar, sewn for my 60th birthday in 1995, a relic of a happier time when my family was still whole. The Willow Creek courthouse was a grand red brick building, its steps worn smooth by decades of truth-seekers and broken hearts. As I climbed them, leaning on Hayes's arm, I saw a crowd outside, neighbors from Maple Lane, friends from church, even the grocer I'd shopped with for years. "They're here for you, Eleanor," Hayes said, noting my surprise. "Word of your case has spread through the town like wildfire." Their presence was a balm, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I'd felt. In the courtroom, I saw my children across the aisle. James, stern in a tailored suit, his jaw set like he was bracing for a fight. Margaret, elegant but tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Samuel, pale and nervous, avoiding my gaze, his shoulders hunched like he wanted to disappear. Their lawyer, a young confident man in a pricey suit, flipped through papers with a practiced ease that made my stomach turn. When I sat, James's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment. Was that shame? Regret? He looked away quickly and I pushed, the thought aside, steeling myself for what was to come. The trial began with formalities, introducing the parties, reading the charges. Hayes laid out our case with precision. I was deceived, misled about the document's contents, my trust exploited to seize my assets against my will and Frank's. Their lawyer countered, his voice smooth as silk, claiming my children acted in my best interest, worried about my safety, my loneliness. The house was too big, too costly to maintain. The sale was logical, the money invested for my care. His words were polished, but they rang hollow to me, a lie wrapped in pretty packaging. Then it was my turn to testify. I stood, swearing the oath with a trembling voice, my hands gripping the stand for support. Facing the courtroom, I looked at my children, their faces a mix of defiance and discomfort. "Why did you do this?" I asked softly, ignoring the judge's question, my voice carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every tear shed alone. "What did I do to deserve this?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Margaret bit her lip, her eyes darting away. Only Samuel met my gaze, his eyes filled with a shame that mirrored his father's quiet vulnerability. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," I said after a moment, steadying myself. "I'll answer the question." I recounted the day they brought the papers, how they hid the text, their false promises of visits, their lies that cut deeper than any knife. I spoke calmly, letting the facts carry my pain, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. When I finished, the judge turned to my children. "Does anyone wish to respond to your mother's testimony?" James stood first, his voice firm but strained. "Your Honor, maybe we didn't do everything perfectly, but we truly believed we were acting in Mom's best interest. The house needed constant repairs. She was alone. It was dangerous." "Then why didn't you ask me?" I interrupted, unable to hold back, my voice sharp with the pain of betrayal. "Why hide what I was signing? Why sell my house in secret?" James had no answer, his face tightening as he sat. Margaret stood, her voice softer but no less defensive. "Mom, you said yourself the house was too big, too hard to maintain." "And that's why you threw a party the day you put me here?" I asked, my words cutting through her facade. "Why you never visited once in all these months?" Margaret paled, her hands trembling as she sat without another word. Samuel stayed seated, his eyes fixed on his hands, as if he could hide from the truth. Then Hayes presented Frank's will, the document that changed everything. I watched my children exchange shocked glances. They either didn't know about it or hoped it would stay buried. The judge's face remained impassive, but her eyes held a glimmer of understanding, a spark that gave me hope. The trial stretched on for hours, a grueling marathon of arguments and evidence. But for me, it was over the moment I spoke my truth. I'd poured out the pain, the anger, the betrayal I'd carried for months, laying it bare for the world to see. I felt hollow, yet lighter, as if I'd shed a weight I'd borne too long. When the judge called a recess until the next day, I left the courtroom on Hayes's arm, my legs shaky, but my spirit unbroken. Outside, Dorothy, who'd come to support me, Betty, and my old neighbors waited, their faces a mix of pride and sorrow. "You were incredible, Eleanor," Dorothy said, squeezing my hand. "So poised, so dignified, like a warrior." I didn't feel like a warrior, just old, tired, and strangely stronger than I'd ever been. Before leaving, I saw Samuel standing alone by a window, his shoulders slumped. He hesitated, then approached, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, will you ever forgive us?" I looked at my youngest, so like Frank in his quiet vulnerability, his eyes pleading for something I wasn't ready to give. "I don't know, Samuel," I said honestly, my voice soft but firm. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn." He nodded, his face crumpling, and I stepped into the sunlight, feeling the first tentative rays of hope warm my skin. 2 days later, the court delivered its ruling. The power of attorney was voided, deemed obtained under false pretenses, a legal betrayal as clear as their moral one. The sale of my house was declared illegal, a violation of Frank's will, which required my notarized consent. My children were ordered to repay the full proceeds of the sale, plus interest and damages for the emotional distress they'd caused. But there was a bitter catch. My house was gone, razed to the ground, replaced by a half-built condo complex, its steel skeleton a mockery of the life I'd lost. The Pittsburgh developer who'd bought it sued my children for damages, turning their victory into a legal quagmire. In the end, I received compensation, the sale price, interest, and a sum for my pain deposited into an account only I could touch, a small fortress of security in a world that had crumbled. Back at Sunset Haven after the final hearing, I sat in my room, staring out at the parking lot, feeling a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. I'd won my rights, my financial independence, but I'd lost something no money could replace. Trust in my children, the warmth of family, the home that was more than walls. It was my history, my heart. For days I drifted in a fog, grappling with the weight of it all. Dorothy, as always, cut through the haze. We sat on a bench in the home's neglected garden, the air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves. "You're mourning, Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not just the house, but the family you thought you had, the love you believed in." She was right. I had to grieve the children I'd raised, the family I thought would stand by me. I had to accept that they weren't who I'd believed them to be. But in that grief, I found something unexpected, a deeper understanding of my own strength. I wasn't just a mother betrayed. I was a woman who'd fought against impossible odds and won. I was 63, but I wasn't done living, not by a long shot. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, like tending a garden after a hard winter. With Hayes's help, I used the settlement to buy a small 2-bedroom apartment in Willow Creek, just a few miles from where my old house once stood. It's the apartment I'm sitting in now, on this balcony where I grow my herbs, my flowers, my cherry tree, a small, stubborn symbol of the life I reclaimed. It's not the sprawling orchard of my youth or the garden I tended with Frank, but it's mine, every leaf and blossom a testament to my survival. This balcony is where I come to think, to remember, to tell my story, because it's here I feel closest to the woman I've become, strong, unbroken, rooted in my own resilience. I left Sunset Haven in February 2000, saying goodbye to Dorothy, and a handful of residents who'd become friends, their faces etched with the same quiet defiance I'd found in myself. Director Brooks shook my hand as I left, his eyes holding a respect I'd never seen before. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "you've taught us all that it's never too late to fight for what's yours or too old to start over." "And never too old to win," I said, smiling for the first time in months, the weight of my victory settling into my bones. James and Margaret sold their homes to pay the damages, their lives upended by the consequences of their greed. They never reached out again, their silence a final confirmation of the rift between us. But Samuel came to my apartment one day, standing nervously at the door, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I know it's not enough. I regret it every day. Now in 2023, I'm 88, sitting here on this balcony, my hands brushing the leaves of my cherry tree, its branches heavy with the promise of fruit. My garden thrives, herbs, flowers, that stubborn little tree grown from a pit Betty saved from my old orchard. Samuel has slowly come back into my life, not fully, not like before, but he visits weekly, sometimes with his wife, Barbara, sometimes with his son, Ethan, who's studying law, inspired by his grandmother's fight, he says. James died 3 years ago, a heart attack, just like his father. I didn't go to the funeral, but I lit a candle at home, and prayed for his soul, not out of anger, but because some wounds don't heal and some bridges are burned to ash. Margaret lives in another state, sending occasional Christmas cards. Signed, Your Daughter. I keep them unanswered, in a box beside my parents' unopened letter, a collection of silences I've learned to live with. Life has taught me hard truths. Family isn't always blood, but those who stand by you when others turn away. Justice may come slow, but it arrives. Forgiveness is a journey, not a gift. I've learned it's never too late to begin again, that strength isn't just for the young or healthy, but often blooms in moments of deepest vulnerability. Each night, I touch the leaves of my cherry tree, whispering to it as I did to my old orchard, its roots a reminder of the life I've reclaimed. Despite all I've lost, my home, my garden, my trust in my children, I've gained something invaluable, the certainty that my life is mine alone. Yesterday, I opened my parents' letter, the one I'd carried for decades, too afraid to face its truth. It was blank. No words, no explanations, no trace of love. But instead of sorrow, I felt a strange peace, like a weight lifting from my heart. I took a pen, and on that empty page wrote my story, a story of a woman abandoned twice, first by her parents, then by her children, but who found her way home each time. Not to a house, but to the home within, a fortress of worth, resilience, and dignity. That's the greatest truth I've learned, sitting here on this balcony surrounded by my little garden. Home isn't a place. It's in us, untouchable unless we surrender it, and I'll never surrender again.